What if the person sleeping next to you every night was secretly planning the collapse of the world? What if your spouse, the one you trust most, was the very traitor you were hunting? In a world where cyber weapons can bring nations to their knees and loyalty can be bought for £7 million, trust becomes more dangerous than betrayal. In this explosive high-stakes spy thriller, a top-level agent discovers that the most lethal threat to global security may be coming from his own home. And as secrets unravel, one question remains. Would you choose your country or your wife? Pasa and the great Kate Blanchett collaborated for the first time. The two starred together in what could be described as a high IQ version of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. This combination sparked an unexpectedly unique chemistry. The National Cybersecurity Center of Ding Country had lost a deadly cyber virus. If it were to fall into the wrong hands, the entire world would be plunged into an unprecedented crisis. But what shocked Pasa even more was that his wife might be the mole who stole the virus. He now faced a difficult choice between loyalty to his country and commitment to his marriage. Should he stay true to the mission or trust his wife? No more delay. Let's dive into the story. The male lead, George, was a top-level agent. One day, he secretly met with his superior. After navigating through a noisy bar and a chaotic midday street scene, George finally managed to meet his boss. They stepped outside for a private conversation. The superior confirmed George's suspicion. There was indeed a traitor in their team. George took the list of suspects. There were 5 names. To his astonishment, his wife Catherine was among them. The reasons were simple. Catherine was also a top-tier agent. She had security clearance. She had motive. She had capability. George had no choice but to report this truthfully. Not long ago, the British Cybersecurity Center lost a key reinstallation device named Severu. If deployed as planned, it would result in the deaths of thousands of innocent people. George pleaded with his superior for 1 week. He was confident he could identify the traitor. In exchange, he asked the superior not to submit the list just yet. After a moment of silence, the superior agreed. Neither of them realized that someone else had witnessed their entire meeting. A few days later, George finished preparing the dishes for a gathering and then went upstairs to find his wife Catherine. His real plan was to expose the traitor. George had invited all the people on the suspect list to a dinner party. Including him and Catherine, there were 6 people at the table. Catherine also knew there was a traitor within the organization. She originally thought George would start with a polygraph test, but George had chosen a more discreet approach. He told Catherine not to eat the hard curry chickpeas. He had secretly laced it with truth serum. Catherine chuckled upon hearing this and nodded in understanding. After all, someone at the table was lying. On the other side, the 4 guests gathered in a corner. The black woman felt curious. Why had they been invited on such short notice, and why only the 4 of them? Mike, however, saw nothing strange about it. They all worked together, 2 couples in the same field. This wasn't something ordinary amateurs could relate to. Soon, the 4 guests arrived at George's house. As dinner began, Catherine led the conversation. She shared a story about participating in the 2012 Syrian cyber war. She had written code to hack into the enemy's central router, paralyzing their entire system. The younger woman was surprised. She had seen that brilliant code before. She never expected it to be Catherine's work. Unknowingly, all 4 guests had eaten the curry chickpeas laced with truth serum. Their conversations gradually grew less restrained. The large man suddenly blurted out that George had once surveilled his own father. His father was a notorious womanizer and habitual cheater. Despite that, he was also a senior intelligence officer who operated with extreme caution. He had devoted most of his life to intelligence work, so much so that his civilian wife could never catch any evidence. But no one expected the son, a secret agent, to take action. George had secretly recorded his father's affair and played the footage during a Sunday family dinner. That incident completely destroyed his father's career and marriage. After all, who would hire an intelligence officer who had been exposed by his own child? The black woman could not help asking George whether it was true that no one could lie in front of him. She had heard he was legendary in interrogations. Catherine gave a faint smile and warned her not to test that theory. Just as the serum was beginning to take effect, she proposed a game. Everyone would sit around the table. Each person would make a New Year-like resolution for the person on their right, a resolution aimed at fixing a personal issue, like quitting smoking. When the game began, it quickly reached the black woman's turn. She was the department head. The person to her right was Mike, an ambitious staffer. So she said her resolution was for Mike to stop always trying to be number 1. Mike said nothing and just smiled. Then the most explosive conflict of the night broke out between the young woman and the large man. I'm going to stop sleeping with her. Not me, her. The large man was publicly outed for his affair. He immediately grew furious. He redirected his rage toward his wife and verbally attacked her. He denied everything, accused her of making false accusations. After everyone had left, Catherine guessed that her husband had used too much of the drug. George did not deny it. While cleaning up, he found a movie ticket stub in the trash. The date on it indicated Catherine had supposedly been on a work trip at the time. Did this mean his wife was truly the mole? George suppressed his suspicions and said nothing. Elsewhere, George's superior finally returned home. But after finishing his drink, he suddenly began to tremble uncontrollably. Moments later, he collapsed and died. The next morning, George got up early and made breakfast. When Catherine came downstairs, he casually asked if she wanted to go see a movie. Catherine replied that she would be traveling abroad for a day on Wednesday. When George mentioned the movie name printed on the ticket stub, she claimed she had never heard of it. While she was not paying attention, George secretly slipped his own security badge into her bag. Then he went to work and told the front desk he had forgotten his badge. He used his ID to get a temporary card. As soon as he entered the office area, the large man approached him and said their superior had suddenly died of a heart attack the night before. But how could a relatively young man die from heart failure? There had to be more to it. He also asked George if he knew what the superior had been working on recently. Of course, George wasn't going to tell him. He just said he didn't know while heading toward Catherine's department. George arrived at the floor where Catherine worked. He wanted to retrieve the badge he had planted in her bag. Since Catherine was in a meeting, she handed him her badge so he could wait in her office. George immediately used it to enter her office. He put on latex gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Then he opened her computer and checked her recent travel schedule. He discovered she was indeed planning a trip to Zurich on Wednesday. Even more suspicious, the exact GPS coordinates were included. George quickly memorized the location. Meanwhile, after finishing her meeting, Catherine went to the black woman's office. The two sat down face to face. As head of signal operations, the black woman needed to assess the agent's psychological condition. Catherine reported that her sleep remained irregular, and she still needed less than 3 milligrams of lorazepam each night. The black woman frowned slightly. Catherine's reported dosage fell just below the mandatory reporting threshold. This made the black woman suspect that Catherine was downplaying her condition. Catherine immediately denied any deception. She insisted she was not hiding anything. Seeing no other option, the black woman ended the session and let Catherine return to work. That evening, after finishing his shift, George went to his usual fishing spot. Fishing helped him release stress and think clearly. As he rowed to the center of the lake, he quietly reviewed everything that had happened in recent days. But suddenly, his fishing line broke. When he turned around, he saw Mike standing on the shore. George rowed back quickly. Clearly, something urgent had happened. Mike told him that their finance department had been working closely with the British tax authorities and customs to monitor bank accounts and offshore tax havens. The goal was to make sure none of their agents' fake identities were being misused to open secret accounts. Everything had always been fine. But this time, they discovered that someone had used the alias Margaret to open such an account. Margaret was a fake identity created by the FBI 20 years ago and had long been banned from use. Just yesterday, someone transferred £7 million from that account. So, one of our people stole a strawman identity and got paid £7 million under it. Even more disturbing, the destination of the transfer was Zurich. George's heart sank again. Everything pointed back to Catherine. That night, the couple went to the cinema. Throughout the movie, George quietly observed his wife. She genuinely seemed unfamiliar with the film. At midnight, George drove Catherine to the airport for her secret mission. Because it was classified, she did not tell him what she would be doing in Zurich. But George was determined to uncover the truth and clear her name. He rushed to the younger woman's home to ask a favor. Despite the fight that had erupted between her and the large man at dinner, the two were still living together. One willing to hit, one willing to take it. The young woman looked a bit shy when George showed up in the middle of the night. She assumed he wanted something else. George immediately denied it. His real purpose was to ask for her help in adjusting the surveillance camera angles at headquarters. He needed it done without being detected or recorded. The young woman said she couldn't do it. George calmly explained that during the brief window when surveillance authority was being transferred, the satellite could be repurposed for other tasks without triggering alarms. He had done it successfully during a past mission. The young woman didn't understand why George was so confident, why he would risk so much for this. The next day, George arrived early at the location she mentioned. He gave her the GPS coordinates he had memorized. They had exactly 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Time was tight. The young woman quickly activated the satellite and began scanning. The final location was pinpointed to a bench in a plaza in Zurich. Moments later, Catherine appeared on the screen. The young woman grinned mischievously. She thought George had just been made a fool. But George stayed unusually calm and told her this is exactly what people in their line of work must do to keep a relationship alive. She's in trouble. Even if it's her fault, I'll do everything I can. Just then, a man sat down next to Catherine. George asked the young woman to zoom in and begin facial recognition. With only a minute left in the satellite window, they had to hurry. Seconds later, she identified the man. His name was Kulikov, a Russian national. She then activated the lip-reading AI to analyze their conversation. Catherine seemed to be negotiating a purchase from Kulikov. Time was running out. The young woman tried to end the operation but realized she couldn't exit the system. Her panic wasted precious seconds. She managed to pull the plug and shut everything down. But the big screen still displayed the footage. George told her not to panic. First, delete all the activity logs. Make sure there's no trace left. At the same time, the large man read the files on his computer and immediately called George. George was equally shocked after seeing the contents. He was then called to attend a secret meeting. The Federation had been closely monitoring a Russian general named Vadim around the clock. Vadim had long collaborated with exiled ultranationalist networks. His goal was to overthrow Russia's government, which had fallen into chaos due to mismanagement of the war. There were rumors that Severu was now in Vadim's hands, but something strange had happened. The satellite assigned to track Vadim suddenly switched feeds, creating a 2.5-minute blind spot. By the time everything resumed, Vadim had vanished without a trace. The question was, how did someone know exactly when the satellite would switch? The only explanation was that there was a mole inside headquarters. George's heart nearly stopped. Who would have thought that his secret surveillance operation with the young woman had unintentionally given Vadim a perfect opportunity to escape? Then the superior mentioned Kulikov's name. George opened the file in front of him and realized that Kulikov was one of Vadim's men. To make things worse, the young woman had already confessed to the large man about what George had asked her to do. Meanwhile, Catherine boarded her return flight. When she got home, the large man was already waiting outside her door. He told her what had happened. If Vadim reached Moscow, George would be blamed and could face 35 years in prison. That was Eric. Was pointless. He had nothing. Don't know why I was there. He then asked Catherine if she knew why George had been watching him. Catherine said she didn't. That night, Catherine lay in bed. George turned over and said he felt like he had been framed. Catherine agreed. Clearly, someone was targeting them. It was a trap. The enemy believed George would act to protect his wife, and he did, which was why he walked straight into their plan. His actions accidentally let Vadim escape. If he kept digging, George himself might be labeled the traitor. Catherine's association with Kulikov was also too hard to explain. But the couple would not sit still and do nothing. The next day, George went fishing again. This time he invited Mike to join him. They paddled to the center of the lake. George told Mike he planned to conduct a series of polygraph tests. Mike had no objection, but he asked who George suspected. George hesitated before saying he wasn't sure yet. Mike then changed the topic. He brought up the bank records. According to his investigation, Margaret was the name Catherine used on her passport in 2008. The system had some issues afterward. That passport identity was recycled multiple times. Over 10 years, it had been used in at least 40 to 50 border crossings. We're no longer looking at Catherine. We, you and me. Meanwhile, Catherine had already devised a plan to lure out the real enemy. She first approached the young woman to request Kulikov's movement data. Then she secretly met a friend from the intelligence agency. In today's bureau, anyone could be a traitor. Catherine had secretly planted a tracker on Kulikov during their last meeting. Now she used her connections to get the agency to authorize a suicide drone strike on the grounds of national security. The goal was to assassinate both Kulikov and Vadim. Once they were dead, no one could accuse her of colluding with the Russians. At the same time, it would stop Severu from being transported, a plan that killed two birds with one stone. Catherine then visited her superior, Old White, at a sushi restaurant. She suspected he was behind everything. Otherwise, how could she and George be framed at the same time? She warned Old White that the operation had to be stopped immediately. He smirked and mocked her for being too late. Ask with the CIA drone along when you get back. Catherine's actions were understandable. If Severu triggered a meltdown, countless innocent people would die. Even if Old White was furious, it would make no difference. Meanwhile, a drone rapidly approached Kulikov and Vadim. It dropped a bomb and exploded violently. Both men were killed on the spot. At the same time, George began conducting polygraph tests one by one. The questions moved from basic to detailed. The content kept changing to avoid predictability. When he asked directly whether anyone had stolen Severu, every participant's emotional fluctuations were clearly displayed on the monitor. But George quickly noticed something unusual. Everyone showed strong emotional responses, except for the young woman. Her readings remained completely stable. Her unnatural calmness aroused George's suspicion. He intensified the questioning. Eventually, she confessed she had read books on how to beat polygraphs. She was using physiological control techniques to remain calm. George warned her to stop clenching her muscles so tightly. After the tests, George invited everyone to another dinner party at his home. If Old White was the mastermind, then there had to be an accomplice who carried out the plan. Tonight would be the chance to catch them. Soon, everyone arrived. Catherine announced the rules. Each person would take turns answering George's questions. Wrong answers would be punished. As she spoke, Catherine pulled out a pistol and bluntly stated that someone tonight would not walk out of this house. The black woman immediately noticed that the carpet under the table had been replaced. This was no joke. The room's atmosphere dropped to freezing. But to stay alive, everyone had to play along. The first question was for the black woman. When did you and the big guy start your affair? It turned out the large man's mistress was the black woman. The young woman was stunned. The black woman admitted it had started 7 or 8 weeks ago. Then both the large man and the young woman answered their questions smoothly. Only Mike remained. George asked if Mike had deliberately thrown the movie ticket stub into the trash, hoping to make George suspect Catherine. Mike refused to admit anything. George continued to reveal the truth. Old White must have offered Mike the plan to steal Severu. It was the perfect move to destabilize Moscow. At the same time, it would implicate Catherine and eliminate George. A flawless 3-step plan. Mike had stolen Severu, then manipulated Catherine into traveling to Zurich, making her believe she was retrieving the virus drive. That same night, Mike planted the movie stub in the trash, triggering George's suspicion, leading him to discover Catherine's travel plans. Mike correctly predicted George would seek help from the young woman to reposition the satellite. While Catherine was under surveillance, Mike took advantage of the satellite window to help Vadim escape. Finally, he framed George as the traitor. Every part of the plan was tightly connected. But Mike had overlooked one fatal flaw. He had personally opened the fake account in Myanmar. George pulled out a photo. It showed Mike appearing at a Myanmar bank. Mike saw the photo and dropped the act. He grabbed the gun and confessed to everything. He insisted he had done the right thing. This was the perfect opportunity to weaken Russia. He had even poisoned their superior to cover his tracks. But as long as he didn't confess, all of this was just speculation. George had illegally used a spy satellite. That alone could land him in prison for the rest of his life. But Mike did not expect George to be one step ahead. George had secretly recorded everything. And the gun Mike grabbed was a fake. In an instant, the situation reversed. In the end, George wrapped Mike's body in the carpet and sank it into the lake. Old White, who had orchestrated the operation, dared not say a word. Mike's disappearance was declared an accident. George and Catherine's life returned to a quiet equilibrium.